bring them about. As the church began to grow, God began to just create passion within leaders to say, why don't we do this? I didn't bring up change the name. This is one of the leaders who brought it up. After a few years of just seeing God bless the ministry, they began to say, hey, why don't we? And we began to move in that direction. So I just want you to understand that God wants to bless His church. He really does. But in order to experience that blessing, we have got to become churches that are much more missional. To get back to the game plan. The game plan, as I see it, it just goes back to Jesus' ministry. Remember when Jesus gave the Great Commission? And you have probably 4 different sort of descriptions of that Great Commission, right? As He gave that Great Commission, He basically told His disciples, go and make disciples of all nations. Now, in the passage, you don't see Him telling them how to do that. And the reason why He didn't have to tell them how to is He had been doing it with them for 3 years, right? So they knew what He meant when He said, go make disciples. Because they had already had that just emphasized and brought to pass in their own experience with Him. So, as we think about this, the big idea I want you to get a hold of with me is a missional church. In fact, let's read this aloud together. The missional church follows Jesus' game plan with a loving balance of disciple-making priorities. That's what we need to get back to. That's what God calls us to if we're going to be able to do this well, to accomplish His purposes. And that's why I see in Antioch, we see Jesus casting that mission, implementing that mission in the way He discipled the disciples, but then we see even beyond that, the way it begins to be lived out in the early church. And I just picked the church of Antioch, but I could choose, and I could do a study with you from Paul's ministry in Philippi or Corinth or Ephesus, and I could show you the same principles in each one of those as well. Because what this was is this became sort of the design for how they would do church in the early church. And that's what I want to get back to. And when I think about the church today, even as we examine our church, one of the things we began to do with our leadership team, they're called deacons to start with, is I would take them and every year we'd have a retreat. And we don't always go away on a retreat, but we always do a retreat. Mm-hmm. And so it's like a Friday night vision casting, development of directions and so forth, and Friday night, and then Saturday morning is like a prayer concert, where we pray for all of the ministry needs. We spend 4 hours in prayer on Saturday morning. But Friday night is where we develop and cast vision in this elders retreat. We've done this for over 20 years. And one of those years we began to look at where are we at Ridgewood Bible Church in fulfilling the mission God's given to us. We had done a study together on the life of Jesus. And in that study we found that Jesus was all about making disciples. And as we looked at how He made disciples, we saw that there were 4 priorities that were continuous throughout His ministry. Of reaching people, of building believers, of equipping workers, and of training leaders. All 4 of those were embedded into the life and ministry of our Savior. They were priorities for Him. And they were also a process. A process that they reach the people, then build them in spiritual life disciplines, then equip them to work, and then go ahead and train them to lead. That's what Jesus did. And that's why the disciples knew what to do when you come to the book of Acts, to Antioch, or to Philippi, or to Ephesus or Corinth. They knew what to do because He had done this with them. These priorities were just all the way through His life and ministry. And yet, what we did together at this elders retreat is I said, guys, let's think through and see if we are balanced in what we're doing in ministry. Because as we did our study in the life of Jesus, we saw there was balance there. That for the most part, there was sort of an equal balance with, I guess, the heavier emphasis was on training leaders. At least in what's recorded in the Gospels. Jesus spends more time with the 12 than anything else. But there was a balance of winning, building, equipping, and training. And I said, let's look at our ministry and see what we have. what we began to see is, we were basically maintaining the programs that were in existence and had been in existence for decades. Well, basically what we found is we were doing some reaching people, we were doing some equipping workers, a little bit, and we actually had a passion to train leaders, but 87% of what we did was all about building believers. So, basically what we did is we asked this question. We say, all right, what do we do Sunday morning? Well, we gather for worship. And what is the purpose of the worship? Who are we targeting? Believers. And what are we trying to do with those believers?
Build them up.
Build them up. Okay, what else do we do Sunday morning? Sunday school. So who are we targeting in Sunday school? Believers. And what are we trying to help them do? Build them up. Build them up. All right. What about midweek? What do we do on Wednesday night? Bible study, prayer meeting. Well, who are we targeting? Believers. And what are we trying to help them do?
Build them up.
Build them up. You build them up in prayer and Bible study. We just went through everything. What about with our children's programs? What are we? And all of it was, 87%. Maybe, an underestimate. By far we were imbalanced. And I'd have to say, even with respect to building believers, we weren't all that intentional focused on really life change within that realm. In other words, Sunday school the objective was to teach the class and go through the curriculum and material. It really wasn't thinking in terms of how do we create opportunities for people really to go ahead and grow in these spiritual disciplines, not just attending class. And so we must confess that we were way out of balance. And so we began to examine and say, well, let's look at our basic budget. Where's the budget invested? It was 90% in building believers. A fraction would go to reaching people. A fraction to equipping works. A fraction to training leaders. There was no training leaders. We began to say, we've got to go ahead and get back. You see, there's a reason why Jesus did what he did. And there's a reason why Antioch was so amazingly blessed by God. And that's what we had to get back to. And the Antioch factor is this: when a church follows God's Jesus game plan, they experience His blessing. They experience His blessing. That's the reality. And so that's what we begin to see, is this kind of direction. And so, as you look on page 4, let's think about these priorities. And think about what this looks like. And what you're going to see in each of these priorities, I'm going to talk about loving and reaching, loving and building, loving and equipping, loving and training. Because what we are convinced of from 1 Corinthians 13 is without love we got nothing, right? And so that's got to be a part of everything, is loving people. And so to begin with, we wanted to love and reach people. And so with that in mind, that became our focus. And that's what we see happening in the book of Acts. Look at Acts 8. Look at with me back to the very beginnings of Acts 8. Persecution broke out, and as a result, on that day, severe persecution, verse 1, broke out and against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout the land of Judea and Samaria. So they're scattered. And it says in verse 4, so those who were scattered went on their way proclaiming the message of the good news. All right, so here they go. They're scattered and they're taking with them the good news. And that's what began to happen. But, where did they all go? Look at me at chapter 11, verse 19. Those who had been scattered as a result of the persecution that started because of Stephen made their way to Phoenicia, to Cyprus, and where? Antioch. Speaking the message to no one except Jews. But that there were some of them, Cypriot and Cyrenian men, who came to Antioch and began speaking to the Hellenists and proclaiming the good news about the Lord Jesus. All right, we're going to look at that and think about that some more in a minute, but just think with me here. They were all about loving and reaching people. All about loving and reaching people. And if we're going to do that, then we've got to share together in the process of winning winning people to Jesus Christ. It's got to be a focal point of our ministry. Now, it doesn't just happen just because we want to. We've got to go ahead, and I talk about harvest steps here. We've got to think through, what does that look like? If I'm going to go ahead and reach people, then I've got to go ahead and begin with, I've got to cultivate relationships. If we were to do a study in Matthias, and I'll introduce our guys here. I have Matthias Acevedo from Uruguay. I have Charlene Zuniga from Honduras. And then John. John is from our own area. And Matthias has been a part of our pastoral internship. He's become, in fact, we call him Pastor Matthias now, right? Because he's getting ready to go back to Uruguay shortly. And so we're glad to have him part of the team. Charlene from Honduras, he's a part of what we call the ordination process, because we do ordination training. We're all about pastoral training as a church. And he's got his ordination coming up Saturday the 24th. You can pray for him. And in fact, can you imagine taking a 3 to 4 hour oral exam in a second language? Can you imagine that?
No.
No, that's not right. That's not right at all. But that's what he's going to do. And Matthias just did it last year, and we're so blessed. And John has been a part of ministry. He just finished at Word Life Bible Institute. He's now in what we call a summer ministry internship. And so he's jumping in and sharing in the ministry here. But the thing that, if we look at cultivating relationships, we can follow Paul both in Philippi, in Ephesus, Corinth, and we will see that it's all about incarnational, building relationships with people. Just loving people, connecting with people, whether it was Aquila and Priscilla and spending time in their home and providing a means for them to come to faith in Christ, or whoever it was, they began to invest in relationships. That is so key to going ahead and having an impact. Not only that, but then to sow the word. One of the things I learned from the trees in our yard, we're blessed with a yard with about 20 giant trees, one of them over 100 feet tall. And one of the things I learned from these trees is sow a lot. You imagine the number of seeds that come out of one of those giant maples? I mean, it's got to be in the tens of thousands every year for the possibility that one maple tree will come up. Tens of thousands. God teaches me through that. Never stop sowing. Sow, sow, sow. There is opportunities to be had here. The other thing is the water. To provide opportunities, once again, to nurture responsiveness to God's Word. One of the things, when I came to Ridge, and I began to ask them questions about, for instance, reaching out. And they'd say, oh yeah, we have outreach ministries. I said, okay, talk to me about them. Well, Vacation Bible School. I say, all right, Vacation Bible School, great. It's a great opportunity to reach out to children and therefore families that are unchurched and to be able to share the gospel with them. So I asked them, so do you share the gospel with them? Well, in the course of the sessions. Do you invite them to trust Christ as Savior? Well, no. So you're going to share the gospel, but you're not going to invite them to trust Christ as Savior. Is there an invitation to? And they talk to me about other brigade ministry. So let me tell you, you got this derby, you got all these families coming in. They asked me the first time they were doing a derby when I was there, and it was downstairs in the fellowship hall basement thing like you have going on here. And they had all the derby thing going on, and they said, Pastor, why don't you lead us in prayer? I looked around and saw families I didn't know. I asked them, so is anybody going to share the gospel here? I've only been there 2 months. They said, no, we don't do that. Well, I don't pray without framing my prayer, guys. So I shared the gospel and gave them an invitation. I'd asked them, we did work retreats. We did one just last weekend. Blessed by God. God's used it in mighty ways. But I asked them, well, tell me, it's an outreach event, so do you share the gospel? Well, not always. And do you do invitations? No. Well, guys, that's not an outreach ministry. At least you're not doing it in terms of watering, providing opportunity for people to understand God expects responsiveness to His Word. As an ambassador for Christ, I plead with people to be reconciled with God. I do all I can to provide opportunities. I want to make our area a hard place for people to go to hell from. Do you understand what I mean by that? I want them to have every opportunity to receive Jesus. So, more than that, we then look to harvest. And God has blessed us to be able to do that in all kinds of various ways. Because, you see, guys, if we're going to be a disciple-making church, we've got to proclaim the gospel every day, every way, everywhere, to every person we can. Continuously. And, sometimes we don't see... I remember just last Sunday, we did baptism. And Big John Page got baptized. We've been praying for John Page for 30 years. That's nothing. There are families within our church family whose parents were praying for Big John Page back 50 years ago. When he was just a little 10-year-old. And now, he's 62, over 50 years ago, he's 62. Big John Page grew up in a tough home, an abusive monster of a father, tough, hard man. His wife married him, and she consistently, she came to church, she got saved, she asked prayer for her husband, for John. We've been praying for John for 30 years. And to have him there in the baptistry finally, and for him just to celebrate with him, we sowed often in this man's life. We watered often in this man's life. Oh, what a hardness of heart. What a resistance. And yet, here he is. He's come to faith in Christ. As we think about this, one of the things we try to focus on, this is something that Matthias and I, even as we went to Uruguay last year, began to share with folks there of how we want to try to game plan to see a harvest. And part of that is to go and connect with people that are lost, build relationships with them. That's what you see in basically that slide there on page 4. And then we want to go ahead and do multiple gospel conversations. Multiple, every which way, and never give up. Doesn't matter, it could be 30 years. Who knows? That's one of the blessings for me in having a long-term ministry. The average for us is pastors, right? Yeah. Somewhere 4 years, maybe? Youth pastors, more like 2? Well, you can't really get deep-rooted into relationships in a region in 5-6 years. It takes longer than that. I've been blessed to see the fruit of that reality. Some of the ministries we established and try, and maybe some of these will match up with you, maybe not. Some of the ministries we established and just trying to pray, and some of these ministries are ministries we just retooled. As I said, we retooled VBS, we retooled work retreats, we retooled derbies, we retooled things to say, let's be purposeful. But one of the things we did is to constantly teach our people how to share the good news. I got saved because one particular guy, an old surfer guy, got saved, and he would constantly try to share the gospel with me. He didn't know a lot of things in the Bible, but he knew John 3:16. And I'd come up with all kinds of objections and give Ray all kinds of grief, and he'd say, Chuck, I don't have answers to all your questions, but the one thing I do know, and he'd quote to me John 3:16 again. I knew John 3:16 by heart before I got saved, because Ray just kept quoting to me that verse. I was like, oh, stop it, Ray. But God used that. And one of the things God used that is to spur in my heart, to train people to be able to share the gospel. Just using something like John 3:16. If they could share it with their friends, they don't need all kinds of special plans and designs and everything else, just to share the good news. Using something like John 3:16 so that they could share the gospel wherever they go. And so we do evangelism training every year. We do it in the spring. We used to call it Van Train. Now we call it name's escaping me. Storytellers Boot Camp. Now we call it Storytellers Boot Camp. But we do it every year because every year we want to help sharpen our people and ourselves what it looks like to share the good news. We want this to be a part of basically the DNA of our church because it was part of the DNA of the early church. We do all kinds of outreach events. And we've been blessed by various outreach events. Some of them are sports events, like 3-on-3 tournament or Chili Bowl. And we've got hundreds of young adults that come to our Chili Bowl from all over Western New York. And we share the gospel and provide opportunities for people to get saved, provide literature, and try to connect with them and draw them in, and we've seen fruit from that as a result. We do things like Care Fest. We began doing Care Fest in 2007 after we'd done a campaign from Rick Warren called 40 Days to Community, I think it was. But it was a really worthwhile program. I don't agree with everything Rick Warren does or says, but this campaign was really worthwhile for us. And one of the things we learned to do was to do these Care Fest operations, where we mobilize our people to go into our particular regions and find ways and arrange for different kinds of projects of caring for people or institutions, to go do a garden here, to go help this person paint their house here. One year, there was an old woman that lived by herself, and her roof was falling apart, and we went over and rebuilt her roof. Just finding ways to love people and care for them, and God's used that. For instance, I was sharing with Bill how we're looking to do an outreach. God's really moved upon our heart to reach out to one of the regions within our reach. 5 miles away from us is a little segment of Lockport, the city, called Lowertown. And Lowertown's like the forgotten region of Lockport. I mean, the schools have closed, the ministries to children have gone. It's just forgotten. And we're just trusting God. And we did our Care Fest there, and we're all about going down there. We're building these garden boxes for the people to be able to have gardens. We're reaching out to the children. Part of this is just Care Fest. Care for the people. Love them. Now we're going to do gospel conversation. We did this Sunday night, and we had teams going around and sharing, visiting homes, sharing about some of the things we'll be doing on these Sunday evenings coming up. And then some were working garden boxes, others were doing other projects. Some were playing with the children, sharing good news with them. And one of our guys, one of the teams that was out there visiting the homes, they came across an older man, 76-year-old man, and he prayed to receive Jesus as a Savior. We just trust in God. Everywhere we go, everything we do, we're going to share Jesus and trust God for the harvest. That's what we need to do. That's what we talk to lift up Lowertown. You can see there in your notes I have things like Relay for Life. That's just loving the people that are in part of the cancer walk. And we go there, we have a booth there. We do a photo booth where we provide opportunities for people to have a memory, a picture with this person. Usually it's a survivor or cancer victim, and sometimes they don't make it to the following year. And yet we provide this picture opportunity and love them, share the gospel with them. We send them literature, and just finding ways to connect. And that's one of the things I found. When I moved up here, we have a very short season, good weather. But because we have such a short season, good weather, people pack a lot into this season. I mean, this is a season where festivals are galore, right? Strawberry Fest, Apple Fest, the county fairs, all kinds of stuff. And so we said, let's find a way to get into these and love people and connect with them every which way we can. And as a result, we've seen God. Last Sunday, I told you we went to the Relay for Life and all about the cancer walk. We're there, and I walk the track and just connect with people. And people are at our booth connecting with people. And one young lady that had cancer as just a young girl, terrible cancer, and battled that. We began to reach out to her at the Relay for Life, going back a couple of years ago. Well, last year she came to our student ministries, to our summer citizens, we call them in the summer. And she went to one of the events. And they always share the gospel. And afterwards, one of our ladies that have been trained in how to share the gospel sat down with Brittany and shared the gospel with her. And she got saved. Mm-hmm. And she got baptized last Sunday. Mm-hmm. She still doesn't have much hair on her head. And just, what a blessing. And to see her folks there and trusting God to get a hold of Paul, and his wife, I forget her name now, but just praying that God would get a hold of these two, that they might be saved too. But brothers and sisters, we've got to be all about loving and reaching people. But that's not it. That's not all of it. We need to go ahead and also give out factors. Loving and building the believers. And when we talk about building believers, I'm reminded of Jesus in Matthew 5-7. And talk about the Sermon on the Mount. He went up there and he spent time with the disciples there, and he trained them in the spiritual disciplines that he was calling us to. Matthew 5-7 is all about reproducing that sun life in us to experience that kind of life of these spiritual rhythms. And as you think about that on page 5, you see what that looks like for us. And in Luke 6, you see this as well. In other words, he didn't just cover it at the Sermon on the Mount. We see him covering some of the same issues in Luke 6 that he covered back in the Sermon on the Mount. In other words, he kept on reviewing these areas of spiritual rhythms that his followers need to grow in. And so we need to do that as well. And so when you think about reproducing steps, I have there in your notes, to begin with, connecting with them. Just connecting with them, building relationships with these people that are just beginning to grow as followers of Christ. Don't leave them to do this on their own. One of the challenges we brought to our church recently is, just because they come to church doesn't mean they're growing healthy. All it means is they're attending church. And they're hearing the Word, and there's opportunities in that sense. But we need to connect with them and build relationships with them and be guides for them, to come alongside of them. And so we established a one-to-one discipleship program called Next Steps, and which we'll talk about in just a few moments. But part of that was just to say to our people, don't just sit in the congregation and not look for new people that are coming. Go sit with them, connect with them, be their guide, and then be ready to go ahead and even take them on the journey of discipleship, short-term discipleship called Next Steps. So connecting, growing, it's so important. Helping people grow in these disciplines, these rhythms, devoting, learning what does it look like to be fully devoted to Jesus Christ, to dedicate one's life to Jesus Christ, sharing, learning how to serve and help and partner in service. We try to get people as soon as we can serving, to buy into identity with what God's doing in the church. And part of that is just coming alongside, getting them to share with us. Be a guide. How about helping me set up the chairs? How about helping we've been through a lot over 25 years of ministry there at Ridge. And for a while there, we had the old South Campus, just an old church that had been around for decades, right? And we got to the point we went from 1 services to 2 services. So we had an 8:30 service, we had 9:45 Sunday school, and 11 o'clock service. And then that didn't work because we ran out of Sunday school spaces. So we went to having dual ministries, where we had 2 sets of Sunday school along with 2 services. And that worked for a little while, but then we began to run out of space. So we did a third service on Saturday evening. And then we had built a family life center, and it was bigger. And we built it so it would be soundproof, so it could work. And then we went over there and said, let's do a service there, because we had to have one that would hold a larger group. And so that's what we began to do. But all of this was just part of just finding ways to make room to help believers grow as followers of Jesus Christ. Right? Now, we talk about discipleship, be one, make one. Hold a noun and a verb. Be one, make one. We want our people to think in terms of, you're a disciple, good. You got the noun part, now the verb part, make one. And so we're all focused on that. This is the bottom of page 5. And so as we do that, certainly as we mentioned before, we're going to go and connect with lost people. We're going to go ahead and do multiple gospel conversations. We're going to be their guide in helping them grow Christ-like. And then we're going to go ahead and get them to gather in community. Get them to gather, and we'll talk about that in our second session about our home groups and what that looks like. So we began to establish ministries to grow that way. One of those ministries, as I mentioned before, before I get to that, connect. One of the things we had a heart for is our people that would visit us at Ridge. How do we help them grow to the next level? Well, one of the things we want to do is connect with them. So what we established was every other month, we have a Connect Luncheon, in which we send out letters to all those who have been our guests over that 2-month period, and we invite them to come to this Connect Luncheon. And we have a luncheon together with them, and at the end of the luncheon, one of our guys will stand and share about what's true of Ridgewood Bible Church, just short, maybe 15 minutes, and then we have prayer requests and we close that. We don't want to gobble up a lot of time, but we want to just create a connection with them. And yeah.
Is this the Sunday after church?
Right. So it'd be like 12, 15, and maybe last about 1:30.
Okay, because we normally have to have lunch anyway. So
Yeah, so we just say, let's have lunch with us, the Connect lunch. So they stay after church and they enjoy that Connect lunch. So last time we had Connect lunch was just a couple weeks ago. We had 7 or 8 guests that were there that had visited one time or another.
What'd you serve?
Well, what we did is we have our ladies do different things. Like that particular day, guys, do you remember what we ate that Sunday at the Connect lunch, Charlie? Charlie says, we eat so much I have lunch. They made casseroles. I'm trying to remember the casserole they made.
No.
It was good, I tell you what. And in fact, they have a whole list of casseroles to make it simple
Okay.
for our ladies doing it, because we do it frequently, because it's just a way of connecting with people. Yeah.
Now, I established something in our church after service because after church service, people would gather and congregate in the sanctuary.
Yeah.
So that told me that they didn't want to leave.
Oh, good.
So we established, our church is called Fillmore Community Church, so we established the Fillmore Cafe in the fellowship hall after morning worship service. And we just served a light snack, coffee, juice,
Yeah.
water, and things like that.
Really?
For the exact same purpose for it.
Yeah, we did that every week in my first church in Baltimore after the service because they'd hang around. Now we do that, we call it transition fellowship. We do it between the 2 services now. But when I was in Baltimore, we did just like you said. And it started around 12:15, and people would hang out to 1-ish because they just want to hang around. And so they'd have a drink and something to snack on.
Right.
You know, make the moms mad at us. Next steps. Now, one of the things I gave in your notes is I got a number of appendices in the back. On pages 29 and 30 in your notes, I give you something of a snapshot of what next steps looks like. So you can look back there. Yeah, page 29. I explained why next steps. On page 30, you can see these are the 4 steps, the next steps. Know, security and salvation, grow, personal walk, grow, family of God, show, ambassadors for Christ. And our people are trained to go ahead and walk people through this. And we have booklets that we use for that we've printed up. If you look back a couple pages back to pages 25, 26, and 27, what we try to do is teach our ministry leaders to evaluate ministry. You know, so often when people evaluate ministry, they do what I call housekeeping evaluation. Did it start on time? Did it end on time? Those kind of things. That's housekeeping. What I'm focused on is, how about purpose? Do we have a purpose? Did we achieve our purpose? So you see on page 25, I talk about, outreach events. If you're going to target lost people, were non-Christians invited? Were they present? Were they exposed to Christ in a positive way? Was the gospel explained clearly? Did anyone accept Christ or go way closer to accepting Christ? How were our people involved in sharing Christ personally? Those are questions we want to ask at every outreach event. When we do debrief, how did we do? Did that kind of thing happen? So you can see on page 26, we talk about these are the things we want to see in an outreach event. Gospel clearly, decisions, reinforce security, invite beyond, further steps, those kinds of things. You can see on page 27 further, it just further develops the same idea of what we want to do. Because in all our ministries, what we try to do is we've got to think in terms of how are we doing on accomplishing our purpose. So whether it's reaching out or whether it's building believers, there's ways to measure whether we're really building believers or not in spiritual life disciplines and rhythms. And so we try to do a careful job of debriefing and evaluating biblically, because that can help us sharpen so we get more effective at what we do. Decisions. We try to invite people to make decisions, people. Every time I do a message. In fact, every time the Word of God is presented. Doesn't Jesus expect a decision to be made? Sure He does. He says, if you build your house on sand, you're foolish. And who's that? One who hears but doesn't do. We've got to teach people how to go ahead and make decisions and then do the carry out of that ministry. And so every message we do, we try to think in terms of how can we help people make decisions and follow through with those decisions. And so you'll see that all kinds of ways in our ministry. And just thinking about, God expects people to make decisions. Like recently, this Sunday, we're going to do a team preach message on marriage from the Beatitudes. I believe those are attitudes that are good in relationship, the way it's designed. And so we're going to call people out, team preach it together with other staff members, and the conclusion is they'll be invited to come forward and make a decision. And what I have is a big old farm gate up there, wooden farm gate. We did this at a couples retreat just a couple months ago. And what we'll do is they'll have black Sharpies, and they'll come up here and they'll sign their names on that gate, seeing sort of the Beatitudes as a gateway to experience Jesus' blessing in their marriage. And so they're going to come forward, they're going to sign onto that gate. We try to find all kinds of creative ways to get people to think through, what does it look like to make a decision? And then try to provide them resources for follow through on those decisions. Campaigns and devotions. I try to write up devotions for our people. Campaigns are just series that we'll do, mini-series, 7 weeks. With, for instance, I'm about to embark on a new series from the life of Jacob. And just learning from his life. Some great principles for life. We're in the midst of a series from Isaac right now. We're calling it the Isaac legacy, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? with Isaac, there's a little bit of all three, right?
Yeah.
Sermon series.
Was that?
Sermon series.
Yeah, those are 2 sermon series. Finished that one up. Actually, Father's Day weekend, Isaac's series. And I'm going to do a message there. You know how confused his family became with him and Rebekah? And with Jacob and Esau? All this favoritism stuff? All this deceit stuff? And it's all messed up. But there's something sometimes we miss in the midst of the mess. And that is, there's something powerful that those sons are wanting an awful lot of. That they recognize as powerful in the life of a young person, not a young person, but here, a man. And that is the blessing of the Father. And so what we're going to talk to our congregation about on June 18th is how to create a culture of blessing in our homes. How to pass on a blessing in our relationships. But that, there'll be just praying and thinking through what God's going to lead us to do on that Sunday. So, fellowship dinners, all kinds of fellowship dinners. Like we do a Thanksgiving banquet, right? And now when we first started doing this in our Old South campus, our building is nearly as big downstairs, and we'd have, 75, 80 people for a dinner, and it would just be packed, right? We got to a point where we opened up certain areas, and we had 100 people in there. Well, now we'll have about 400 people for the Thanksgiving banquet, and it's just fantastic. Because it's not just that banquet, but then we bring them into the worship center. We have a celebration of praise. And we'll have 100 people share testimonies of praise at our Thanksgiving banquet. It's just wonderful. It's my favorite event of the year. But all of this is part of helping believers grow. We want them to grow to praise God. Grow to give God praise for what He's doing in their lives. And then flocks, we'll talk about that in the second session. Thirdly, we need to go ahead and think about loving and equipping the worker. And what it looks like to share as teammates in the ministry. Once again, you can see this in Jesus' ministry. We look back at Luke chapter 9. Trying to plug a lot in, and so here and there I'm missing some passages here. But in Luke chapter 9, you'll see Jesus focus on, Luke 10, the training not the 12, but the 70. And sending out the 70 to go ahead and proclaim the good news of the kingdom. He equipped them to do that, and then He sent them to do that. I believe He did the 12 first, and then He does it with the 70. And then they come back, and they're rejoicing what God's done. And Jesus gives them a great debrief time. He just celebrates what they're being able to see that nobody else has been able to see. The kind of breakthroughs God wants to bring in the life of ordinary people. But unfortunately, we prevent ordinary people from seeing those kind of breakthroughs when we don't equip them. It's all about equipping our people. How can we equip our people to go ahead and share in the life of ministry? Ephesians 4, as I said, one of the things I do in my study of the Scriptures, as I meditate on the Scripture, and years ago, as I meditated on Ephesians 4, I meditated on it as I began to think about, what would this look like if this was true of our ministry in Baltimore? That's where it started for me to think that way. What would have to change? See, I came to Christ through a parachurch ministry. I was discipled, effectively through that parachurch ministry. But one of the things I lacked was church ministry. It was a vacuum in my life. So when God began to move my heart to become a pastor of a church, I'm like, what on earth? How am I going to do this?
Okay, you're saying parachurch ministry. Can you explain that?
It was through a Bible study that reached out to students. And they discipled us. They led us to Christ and discipled us. But they didn't help us plug into a good Bible-believing church. That was really a bad part of my journey. It was so weak there. So as I meditated on the Scriptures, I was asking God, what should the church look like? And as I meditated on Ephesians 4, what should a pastor's ministry look like? And as I meditated on it, I began to think, well, what it says here is that a pastor should be equipping the people so that the people can do the work of ministry. Lord, if that was to be true of our church, what would need to change here? What would I need to change as a pastor? How would I need to go ahead and cast that vision to our people and get them to own it? Not only own it so that they could be all the more intentional about thinking in terms of, I want to be a worker in the ministry. I want to be able to effectively win people to Christ, disciple people. I want to be all the various facets, shepherd people, visit people, care for people, all of these things, counsel people. And so we began to do all of these kinds of things because we're convinced that equipping believers is something equipping workers is vitally important. Believers that are growing in spiritual discipline. Now, that's popping. Those are people we need to go ahead and say, all right, how can I equip them now? So that they can be an effective worker in ministry. That's what we see happening in Antioch, by the way. You look at these no-names that brought the gospel there, right? And then you look at the no-names that begin to do the work of ministry. One of the things you see is this guy named Saul that Barnabas reaches out to and brings there to Antioch. What a risk, right? This guy was radical. And he brings this guy, the former persecutor, there to Antioch. Jerusalem church was afraid of him. Barnabas brings him there. But it's not just him. You look at Acts 13, you see all these other guys who are serving and teaching and ministering the word. Well, how did that happen? It happened because there was intentionality. That's how it happened. They weren't just thinking in terms of come and gather. Oh, you're growing. One of the things I ask God, Lord, and I focus on the men's part of the ministry, the men part of the equation. I ask, Lord, for every man you bring our way, Lord, help me to have a vision for how you want to grow this man to become not only a follower of yours, but to be an effective worker for you, to serve in this ministry. But more than that, how can I help that person, that man, become the leader you've designed him to be? And begin to pray towards that end, about that individual guy. And trust God for what are the steps we need to go ahead and look to nudge this guy to take so that he can go ahead and be at the next place to seize God's plan for his life. And so that's what we begin. So ministry skills, I give you those. Evangelism, Bible discovery, sound doctrine, prayerful dependence, disciple making, biblical counseling. Guys, what a time. The pastor that had the most influence in mentoring me was a great, caring pastor. And Pastor O'Brien said to me, he said, Chuck, he said, in my ministry, 30-some years in ministry, people would come to our church. They came from good backgrounds for the most part, whole homes, not a lot of brokenness. Even the lost people weren't all that bad shape. He said, but now, the day you're reaching people, it's a mess. Mm. You're going to have to be able to do things effectively that I never had to do. And he was right. I mean, over 75% of the people that we reach right now are either living together apart from marriage, divorced and single parents,
Yep.
or blended homes where they are previously divorced and now remarried. Over 75%.
Yep.
That's a lot of brokenness, guys.
Yes.
The kids were reaching.
Yes.
By far the majority of the kids in the schools, broken, blended, or, apart from marriage situations. Oh, it's a wreck. And it takes a determination to say, it's not just good enough to preach from up front. We're going to have to come alongside of people and help them work through the issues. They're just tearing them inside out. And so we're all about training our staff team to be able to give godly counsel. We're all about training our people. I've been doing biblical counseling training for over 20 years in our church. Because when I was pastoring in Baltimore, we were reaching people coming out of the pit. I was counseling, and at that time, I had over 30 hours a week of my ministry time was just in counseling. And we were seeing breakthroughs of all kinds. But there's just radical need. And so when I came to Ridge, one of my determinations I made is we're going to train the people. We're going to equip the people. And that's what we've been doing. We've had over 300 people trained through our biblical counseling training ministry to be able to share the word and help people with the crises of life. Prayer. To teach people how to pray. One of the strategic ministries we established early off was a prayer partner ministry. I don't know if you guys have done that. I think it was Marshall that really inspired me to think in terms of having a group of in this case, guys. We have a ladies' prayer partner ministry too, but a group of guys in this case to pray during every service. And they gather in my study and they pray for the ministry, for what God's doing in the Word, in the hearts of the people. Every service, every meeting, every gathering, they're in there praying. And we have several teams. We have a team according to whatever week it is and whatever service it is, gathering for prayer. That is highly devoted. One of the things I found in Timothy, Paul writes to Timothy, he says, first of all, see that men learn how to pray. That didn't tell me fifth of all, 10th of all. Well, I was shocked one day when I overheard a guy saying, if you want to get involved in ministry, what you ought to do is midweek ministry. You ought to help out with brigade. Otherwise, you'll have to be in prayer ministry. And just the vacuum of men learning how to pray. The marriages where wives say, no, my husband never leads in prayer. And to help men learn to have confidence in prayer. Oh, this is so strategic. And then we did lay preacher training. We did a lot of different things that way. Ministry workshops. On page 31, I give you a list of various ministry workshops we've done. Short-term mission trips aren't just about people having the thrill of going overseas. It's all about training we do ahead of time. We do weeks and weeks of training. It's the ministry projects and then the debrief times when they come back. But page 31 is the ministry workshops we do. Every year we do ministry workshop of some form to train our people in ministry and so that people can be equipped to accomplish the work together with us. That's what you see on page, 31 and 32. Ministry workshops 31, page 32 is short-term mission trips. And as I say, those aren't just for having an opportunity to go overseas. It's a ministry of training and ministry skill. And that's what it's all about.
Would you be willing to open those for these up to other churches?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. Love to. Like when we do our every year, our evangelism training. We'd love to have you all come. It's one of the blessings we have. This past year, we were focusing on what I shared with you before, sort of sometimes it's called the 4 fields with 4 priorities: go and connect with people, building relationship with lost people. So we had a session on that. We had a session on how to start gospel conversations because people are sometimes lost at that. The third session was one I did, was on how to help people who respond have an assurance of salvation. So we're just walking through how to go over simple verses out of the Gospel of John and help people have an assurance of salvation. So we're just trying to help people learn how to do these basic things. Fourth session was just how to help somebody, be a guide for them to learn how to connect with the ministries, whether it's with church, worship. Sometimes they're not quite ready for that yet. It's just, they've had bad experiences. And maybe it's just with a home group or whatever, but how to be a guide to help them connect with people. So I'd love for you guys to be a part of that, and now we'll be able to communicate more freely through Mike with you guys, and then as we get information from you, we'll do that directly too. So the ministries that we established, we've already shared with you, van training, next steps training, prayer partner ministry. We do training with them every year in October. We have a prayer partner training time, which we train them about prayer ministry. Bible Institute, we've done that for years. Ministry workshops, you see some of those. Lay preacher training, I mentioned that. And then short-term missions. All of those are ways in which God has blessed us in growing. One of the blessings I have is one of the guys that's in our home group at our house is big old Fred Jefferson. Fred's a tall fella, one of our... I'd love for us to be a more diverse congregation. We're not. We live in a rural area. But we have a few black families, and Fred's one of those, so we're glad for Fred. And Fred is just such a blessing. But you know how Fred first came to us was we were teaching our Bible Institute about how to preach. And Fred wanted to learn how to preach. So he came and took our lay preacher training from my son, and Fred's been a part of our fellowship since, and we just rejoice in Fred in that sense. As well, one of the guys that had come to us from a liberal Presbyterian church and got saved, got baptized, and he really has a heart for the Hispanic ministries, Jeff Walsh. And so he wanted to go ahead and be a part of our Hispanic ministry because we're planning a church among the Hispanic peoples, and Matthias and Charlene have been a part of that. Joe Wisniewski heads that up, and so Jeff wanted to be a part of that. And so they had a Spanish class that they teach him a little bit of Spanish, and then how to do Spanish Christmas carols and Spanish outreach. And Jeff had such a heart for this, and understanding how you got to build relationships, that he signed up with one of our area farmers, that he would work out in the fields with the migrant guys, right alongside them. Well, you know, and build relationships with them, so that out of that he could invite them to come to the outreaches. And he's just, Matthias, you want to say anything about Jeff and that connection?
We got an increase in amount of guys after he started to work with them, because he didn't probably know too much Spanish to communicate with them, with the Spanish people there, but his love for them was shown there in the field, and that created an opportunity for us to reach them. So,
Powerful.
God,
One of the stories Jeff tells is, you know, the guys, the way they do their work, and Matthias and Charlie, you guys can share more about this, is they get paid according to how much apples they pick, kind of thing, and that sort of thing. And so when one guy's done with his portion of picking and filling up his big old boxes, you know, he's done, so he's ready to take a break. Meanwhile, there's somebody else that isn't done, and he's continuing to work, and the other guys are just standing around. And so one of the things Jeff did, he said, why not help the other guy? And he began to share with these guys about how to love their neighbor and to help their neighbor accomplish his task. And they began to do that, and it's just one of the breakthroughs there. It's a blessing. Loving and equipping. We also need to love and train leaders. As I said, if there was an imbalance in Jesus' ministry, it was focused in this room. And you can see it, once again, you'll see it in Antioch, you see it in Jesus' ministry all the way through. Of course, we have the 12 because of that, right? At least the 11. And then we see it in Corinth, leaders that grow up out of Corinth. But in Antioch, in Luke 13, it says, the local church in Antioch, there were prophets and teachers, Barnabas, Simeon, who was called Niger, all right, he's not Saul, right? Lucius, the Cyrenian, Manaen, a close friend of Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul. And they were ministering the word and so forth. These guys were all working together. So if we're going to share and train leaders, we need to share together investing in shepherds. We've got to invest in them. That's why we do pastoral internship training. That's part of the fruit of this. That's why, as we've described, both Matthias and Charlene, they've come through that. In the case of John Eggert, summer ministry internships. We've had probably 15 summer ministry. In fact, Charlene, you've been in our summer ministry internship, what, 4 times? 3 times?
Yeah, 3 times.
3 times. And we're praising God. Pray with us, because Charlene is working on getting his visa, religious workers visa. And SBC has helped us with making a connection with a good lawyer that's helped us. And then Terry Robertson there, the state director, also has helped us. And then, as well, we had the immigration people come in this past week. That's an answer to prayer, because the whole application process is just it's ridiculous, right? And so one of the steps that they got to come and check you out, make sure you're legit, right?
Right.
And they came and they met with Charlene and with our guys. We were just praising God, and they said, we're going to recommend you to go forward. We're so excited because we're looking forward to 3 years of residency and seeing Charlene be able to grow as a servant of God. He's going to finish his coursework at the Southern Seminary during that time. Yeah. And then he's getting his ordination this into this month, right? Charlene, you got that? Love you to train the leaders. We got to do it. Not just quick workers, but we got to train leaders. We got to be intentional about it. Jesus was. John 13 through 17. Who's he working with there? The 11. And some ladies. There's ladies there too. Okay? I know Martha's there. I know Mary's there. At least those two. Yeah, Bill.
This is a more basic question. The formula 5 minus 1 equals 0.
Good thing.
Could you say that again? I missed
I'm sorry.
that.
I'm going to get to that here as we talk about, and so I'll answer that in just a second, all right? All right, so, shepherd targets. We want to grow in character, disciple making, and leading with love. 1 Corinthians 13. If our church, this once again, meditating on the passage, and this we got a little help from, spent time with him at a conference. Got to know him well. Now I forget his name. He wrote a book called Leading in Love. But in case, and he's the one who challenged me on this. As I look at 1 Corinthians 13, I see in verses 1 through 3, what if I had the ability to communicate like nobody else ever did? And let's say I had the wisdom that I understood not just the scriptures, but all the mysteries of human problems and needs. And what if I had faith that could move mountains? And what if I had the courage and the generosity to give all that I have to the poor, but more than that, the courage to even offer my life in martyrdom? But I didn't have love. That's 5. Minus 1. What do I got? I got 0. But oftentimes in church ministry, we focus on the 5. What if we could communicate? We have the greatest communicator. What if we had all the knowledge and wisdom? What if? And I didn't have love. What do I got? Let me go back to the church of Ephesus, right? You got a lot of things going on, right? In the book of Revelation, Jesus talks to them. You got a lot of good things going on. But what happened? You left your first love. Okay? 5 minus 1, what do we got? We got 0. That's the mathematics of ministry that we've got to keep a hold of. And when we train leaders, when I came to Ridgewood, our leaders were called deacons. They were a board. They would meet together once a month. They'd open and close in prayer. And then, there'd be a pastoral report. And then there was some business stuff. And then we closed. And it was a typical sort of governing board. And I just repented of that nonsense. I said, Lord God, help me to train and grow these leaders to be the shepherds you called them to be. They need to be shepherding people. How do I do this? And that's what we're going to talk about in the next hour, next session, is our flock ministries. We're strategic in this whole process. But what we have today, guys, is this. Our typical meeting is not, and in fact, in a typical meeting, if there's needs, I brought them up as the pastor. And, there would be a closing prayer that will last now into about 15 minutes. Or if that, 5 minutes typically. Now, these guys are bringing up the needs because they're shepherding their flocks. They're shepherding whole geographic neighborhoods of believers. They're connecting with them on a regular basis in the course of the month. They're discovering needs. They're beginning to minister to those needs. They're reporting back to me when it's over the top. And then I'll either equip them, that's usually what I want to do, or I'll help them. But I want them to do the work of ministry and shepherding. And so we're all about training them to be the shepherds they ought to be. And the result is our meetings radically changed. Oh yeah, we still deal with the life of ministry and the work of the church. But we spend hours in prayer. The heartbeat of leadership is radically changed. It is not about simply being a governing board. It's about being shepherds. It radically changed the heart of leadership in our church. It is one of the greatest adventures that God led us on. Shepherding targets. We want them to learn to lead with love, how to shepherd people. We want them to be ready when they see a need to be able to take action, minister to that need. Don't just see a need and try to remember it and maybe tell me the following week. Take action. If it's over your head, talk to me. I'll equip you, or I'll go with you. But it's going to be rare that I do it for you. That's going to be really rare. Because I want you to be effective in the ministry God's called you to be. God's called you to be a shepherd. I shared these directions when I was doing my doctorate work at the Baptist Bible Seminary, and the dean of the school there, I'm forgetting his name right now, Bill, but in any case, he had developed a similar program that he called Deacon Caring Ministry that he did for the Baptist churches that are part of these regular Baptist churches in all over the place. And so, but it came down to the same basic ministry. I just said, well, the only thing you're lacking is having a biblical name for them. But, so we had fun with each other about that. Not so much fun with him. So in any case, part of this is I need to have leaders that will learn how to lead with vision. Let me talk to you about that in the last session. We can't just, how do we maintain? How do we trust God for what He wants to do next that is above and beyond what we have done before? Because God is always about leading His people to next victories. In my spiritual life, He doesn't leave me the way I was, praise God, 30 years ago. Aren't you glad? No, He's got, Chuck, I really like you to grow in this. I was talking to Buddy, right? Before the meeting, and he was sharing with me that one of the things that, as an interim pastor, he had burdened for with this church was a particular area that we had to do a lot of work on. And this may be an area that you have not come to the conclusion we had come to. For years, I taught in our church that the expression both in Timothy and Titus, it says a one-woman man, that a leader of the church must be a one-woman man. I taught that for over 30 years. That meant that someone who had been divorced could never be an elder or pastor. That's what I taught for over 30 years. But I began to re-examine that when I was doing a training time with our shepherds. As I was going back through that basic expression, one woman man, and examining that text in Timothy especially, and looking back through it, I began to rethink and repent of what I taught. I began to think in terms of this actual, and I'm just doing a short rendition of this, so there's a lot of work that we did. And we went through with our church, with our elders, for over a year of working through this. And we have quite a substantive brochure that we developed from that to go ahead and say, I don't believe that was the intent of this passage. That I was hanging an awful lot of weight of conclusions, teaching, and policy on a very thin wire of 3 words in the Greek. It's 3 simple concepts. A one-woman man. That one-woman man, it doesn't say, and Paul could very well have said, in that listing of character traits, he lists some things that he says, not this, not a brawler, not giving wine. He has those that he lists. And he could very well have said, not divorced. But he didn't say that there. Instead, what he said They put it in a separate part of the list, and they said, a one-woman man. A man fully devoted to one woman, fully faithful in his marriage. And guys, I had to do some rethinking about what I had done. And there's a lot more to that story. There's much more, and that's a whole other topic. And if you have not been convinced, don't worry about that. This is just something that we were convicted of, that we were allowing this to be a determiner that would basically label someone who had suffered divorce as someone that was an outcast, unlike any other sin, or any other defeat or discouragement or trouble in someone's life. As we were wrestling with it, one of the things we began to think about is if I had a guy that had been promiscuous for 20 years and had multiple sexual escapades for over 20 years, all kinds of children from those relationships, but let's say he got saved, and let's say he got his life cleaned up, maybe after he had a couple more escapades. But he got his life cleaned up, and now he's been clean for about 5-10 years, and now he's got married. He's living a good, wholesome marriage life. He'd be a prime candidate for an elder if he's godly and good and growing. But meanwhile, here's a guy who really wanted to do the right thing, and he got married. Wasn't promiscuous in all kind of relationships, and it blew up in his face. Yeah, some of it his fault. Sometimes not always. This guy is an outcast. He could never be an elder. But the other guy, yeah, for sure. There's something wrong with that, people. I think we've missed the concept of grace. And I think we put an awful lot of weight on a very thin wire that it does not have the evidence in that text to support. I have much more to develop on that. I don't want to get into that. I don't want to mess you guys up with that. But that was a heartbeat thing for us. And as a result, God's given us the opportunity to help people with those kind of issues. So these are some of the shepherd targets, ministries that we tried to establish. Elder training. We've got to train these elders. We've got to go ahead and think in terms of discipling, training them how to make disciples. More than that, how to lead ministries. One of the things we developed was shepherd roundtables on page 8. You see that? Shepherd roundtables. Here's where we're developing leaders. I got guys that are workers in the ministry, but they're not elders. Well, how do they get from workers in the ministry to elders? Is it just one giant step? No. We got to go ahead and do some work. What would it look like for us to effectively help people become the elders fully qualified that God would have? It's not like Paul is giving Timothy a list in 1 Timothy 3. Does that work with other pastors, young pastors? They say to me, I'm praying that God will give us some good elders. Yeah, you've got people that have come to Christ? Yeah, we do. Any of them growing as followers? Yeah, we do. Are they helping in the ministry? Yeah, they are. But we need God to give us an elder. And God's got, no! God wants you to grow elders. And that's why he's writing to Timothy, these are the kinds of things you need to intentionally, purposefully aim to reproduce in men that are growing in Christ. To grow them to become qualified leaders, spiritual leaders in your church. And so what we begin to do is have what we call Shepherd's Roundtable. And part of this is burdened out of Luther and his table talks, or the people that he brought into his home and family. We begin to bring our shepherd team into our home and family, and we just do training with them. And training might deal with doctrine, it might deal with ministry skill, it may deal with ministry directions and vision and direction that way. Whatever it is, we get these guys and they come to our house on a regular basis, and we're all about shepherding, training these shepherds. So the guys that are elders, becoming elders today, they come into our church and they've been some of them have been led to Christ and discipled. Some of them, all of them have grown as workers of ministry. And then eventually we've gone ahead and said, hey, how about come alongside and grow as a shepherd in training? And so they've been through that process. And then after they've been through that process, then they become an elder in training. They sit in on elders meetings. We do some further debriefing with them. And then we look to develop them as elders. So, potential. Pastoral internships has come out of that with these guys, other guys we've had. God's blessed us. Now we've done 12 ordinations. As I said, our ordinations is not just a quick sort of thing. It's a whole process, at least a year process. Well, 9 months to a year or 3 years, depending on how it goes. We've got bilingual things, it might take longer, right? So that's what we do. And then summer internships like John's in right now. That's what we try to do. And that's what, because guys, if I want to multiply disciples, I need to grow leaders. How did Jesus get to the point that when the mission was given, that there was able to be the multiplication of disciples and the multiplication of churches planted? Because he trained leaders. He didn't just speak to crowds, right? He didn't just deal with the 70. He spent a lot of time with the 12. And some of those would be heartbreakers, like a Judas. It's just part of life and ministry, right? People that you've invested in, cared for, loved, has shared with you in ministry, done things right alongside you, and yet they break your heart. It's just part of what we see. Well, let's go ahead and close this session in prayer. And there's so many stories I could tell with you about that, but let's close in prayer because we've got to get to that second session in a few minutes. Father God, I thank you, Lord, for this time we could share together. I pray, Father, for us as churches, that, Lord, you would help us to be intentional to accomplish your purposes in ministry, to grow churches that have the vitality you've designed them to have, of growing by conversion. Churches growing by conversions because we're purposefully accomplishing the priorities that were part of your ministry. Help us grow in this regard. Bless us in this endeavor. For Father, we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.